Hi, and welcome to AI for UX. This is the space where UX researchers and product leaders stay current with AI innovations. I'm John Whalen. I'm the founder of Brilliant Experience. We're a psychology-driven product innovation firm. So in each installment, we speak to a founder of one of the latest AI-enhanced research tools and dive into its inspiration and how it might benefit you and ultimately where the field is heading. So today, I'm delighted to be joined by John Provine, and he's the co-founder and CEO of Voicepanel, and it's an AI moderation tool that recruits your target users, runs adaptive voice or video interviews, and delivers instant thematic insights, putting your user research on autopilot. So just a quick note, these videos are not product endorsements. We always pay full price at Brilliant for any technologies we use, and nobody's getting paid. It's just to let us all learn together. So with that, let us get started. So John, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, John.
Yeah, of course. Well, let's dive right into Voicepanel. So maybe you can just tell me a little bit about your target audience for Voicepanel and ultimately what the kind of pain points it addresses.
Yeah, we are building a product for product builders. So you can think of Voice Panel as an easy way to gather feedback on your live apps, prototypes, new concepts at every stage of product development, from initial conception to launch. And product teams we consider in a very inclusive way. So this could be product managers, engineers, UX designers, product marketers, UX researchers. I think a lot of the lines between some of those roles are starting to blur. And yeah, we serve a lot of different use cases in our product, everything from very foundational use cases like trying to understand what your target users think about a certain topic, how they go about different purchase behaviors, all the way to more evaluative work. So getting feedback on new products, prototypes, and concepts.
Cool. Well, that's quite a range, and it does sound like sort of from entire life cycle of products is what you really got as a focus. If I've got it right. And so what, maybe just since that's quite a range, can you give me a typical scenario when you find either the product team or researchers and others using Voicepanel?
Yeah, I'll give you a concrete example. There's a Fortune 500 company that we're working with. It's a consumer subscription service that operates in more than 50 different markets around the world. When they first came to us a little over a year ago, they were doing more foundational use cases, trying to understand how consumers think about buying subscriptions or canceling subscriptions. And maybe so what's leading to subscription fatigue, what's influencing their spending, and so on. And so this company was able to conduct more than 500 interviews over the course of just a few hours in different markets and different languages and present those results to the executive team. And that influenced, things like retention strategy. That's sort of more a foundational use case. And since then, that same company has increasingly been using Voicepanel for more evaluative research. So getting feedback on new product proposals, design prototypes in Figma, as well as sort of live apps, and actually embedding that as a core part of the product development process. So rather than thinking of research as a project, actually trying to embed it in the process itself.
Nice. And I deeply appreciate having research as sort of baked into that this is how we work, as opposed to here's a one-off research project that we're doing. And also great to see its influence from top to bottom there as well. Well, there are a few things that allow us to do video or voice interviews that are moderated by AI. So maybe you can just tell us a little bit about what distinguishes Voicepanel relative to other options.
Yeah, there's a couple of things I'll mention that are maybe a little different than some of the other options out there. So number one, we've really thought about how do we embed Voicepanel into the product development process. And the core problem that we're seeing with the thousands of product teams that we've spoken to over the last year is what we call the cold start problem. If you are building a product, there can be a lot of overhead involved in actually setting up quality research. Typical workflows, you go talk to your UX research team. they have to think about how to do the recruit effectively, for example, from the customer base or recruiting via a panel. Just setting up a good discussion guide or a survey or some combination of methods can be very time consuming to get right. Then, of course, there's things that come up during the process. Maybe you get some fraud you want to filter out. There's a lot of synthesis work. If you're collecting hours of videos, you got to put that all together. And it just ends up being a multi-week process a lot of the time. And this is true even of organizations that are really sort of believe in a more democratized research practice and want to open up research to product managers and designers. I don't think anybody has really cracked this. Some of the best organizations out there, there's still a tremendous amount of overhead. So that is the core problem that we are focused on, and just making that a very easy process. Another thing that's a bit different is that we've thought about how do we actually embed Voicepanel in a product. So actually intercepting users in a web application. It was something we support right now. And then we're also working on supporting that in native apps as well. So there's just like a couple of things that make us a little different. We often get bucketed as sort of an AI moderation tool. I think that's how you introduced us at the beginning. And we do have AI probing and conversations as an option in our product. But we prefer to think of ourselves as more general agent that can do all types of research. You can do quantitative surveys. You can do usability tests that may not actually have sort of AI probing involved, kind of depending on what you're looking to get out of it. So we see that as sort of a feature of the platform and not necessarily, the core offering.
Yeah, well, I appreciate the clarification. And right, given that range, also just how, Voicepanel helps folks to kind of figure out how they should be doing these kind of things. Because often our product teams aren't as familiar with like mixed methods and other things like that, and certainly can partly we have the right balance of where everyone is working with research.
Well, yeah, and I think there's a lot of bad research out there, and I think the democratized research experiment is still quite early, and there's a whole spectrum that the companies are on there. But I think it's incredibly important, when opening up more tools to product teams, that you're working to maintain a high bar for quality. So you're reusing research that's already been done in the past. You're making sure that, if it's a larger organization, you likely need to have a research ops person involved that's able to monitor and kind of track what's going on with research across the team. And so thinking through all the governance and guardrails is incredibly important to actually get this right.
No, I appreciate that thoughtfulness and thinking about just how do you do this at scale, because I before I had any of the tools that allowed me to sort of scale my work, I didn't realize how much research we can conduct with these various tools. And then, then I've got hundreds or thousands of interviews or surveys and so on. And how do I bring this all together? So I appreciate that. Well, one of the things I did want to ask too is, like, I sort of had this mental transition, I think our team did, of how we approach just gathering insights and conducting things. So whether we're one-off versus more regular research and so on. So just, for the folks that don't have the luxury of having Voicepanel now, how should they think about working with a tool like yours? So how might their work evolve once they have Voicepanel?
Yeah, I'll tell you a story early in my career that was some influence on the idea to start Voicepanel. So I started out my career at Google back in 2005. It was a very different company at the time, about 3,000 people. And my first role was building the A/B testing experiment framework for search. So this is internal tooling that engineers could use to test whether their changes are making a positive impact or not. And there was a very rigorous process around, every week, the whole team would get together. We would look at the experiments run that week and decide which ones we want to launch and why. And so, of course, Google, a very data-driven company, and there were thousands of metrics that were tracked with every single experiment. But much lesser known, but equally important, is we were collecting mountains of qualitative feedback for every one of these experiments. In the case of the search team, that usually took the form of an A/B comparison. So raters would be asked, which of these versions of the search results do you prefer? And they had to explain why in a a substantial amount of detail. And we would do this not just for a sample of 10 to 20 people, like a qualitative study. We would do this for hundreds or thousands of people as a routine part of product development. So anybody who's making a change had to do this. And I think we're moving to a world now, there's a lot of companies now that are bringing AI into their product experience, having things like a chat interface where every single user is having a different experience. And I think it really changes how product teams should be thinking about whether that product is working for people or not. And so to directly answer your question, I think the way that the process will change is stop thinking of research as just something that's project-based, that is sort of an interrupt to the flow, and think about it more as like a part of the product development process where every single thing you do, you can press a button and get a stream of quality feedback. And all of the mechanics of how to recruit the right people, the questions to ask, how to kind of surface that to the right people internally and summarize it is all sort of taken care of. So that's sort of, our vision of what we're working on. And, it's influenced by some experiences I've had in the past.
Sure. And I actually have had those, experiences where we're talking to the engineers or product teams and, oh, it's so sweet that you interviewed like 80 people. You know that we work with 800 million in our product. So, so being able to scale sometimes and have impact to, that's on par with what folks need to feel compelled is an interesting one. And so totally been there on that perspective. So, well, and I do actually also appreciate that there are many things your tool does that really don't have to do with, you could be an unmoderated usability test as a representative example, but for when you are using AI in analysis or in moderation, people are probably reasonably concerned that there might be like hallucinations, that there's this finding that's made up or some sort of bias. And so I do know that folks like you have very thoughtful ways of approaching that. So I just wanted to ask you briefly if you could touch on it. So while we can't have Voicepanel's secrets on the air here, but you could tell me generally how you approach those kind of issues.
Yeah, I mean, I'm always happy when those concerns come up, when we talk to companies because it, shows people really care about the quality. And of course, we think about this all the time. We really care that AI is not going off the rails. And there's a couple of things I'll mention. Number one is that the AI models are changing all the time. The models we use today are the worst models that we'll ever have. And so, even if something isn't quite performing the way you expect right now, it's not necessarily that will be the case in a month or in a year. We do a lot of evaluations. We have many different prompts used for various parts of our product, and we rigorously evaluate each of those. And we built in human feedback loops. We're actually using our own product to do this. So for example, every respondent that uses Voicepanel has a thumbs up or thumbs down rating at the end of the experience, and then the option to provide qualitative feedback on the actual unmoderated survey experience. And that directly goes into understanding where did AI potentially go off the rails in that session. And kind of we start thinking about adding a golden set of examples of what we want the AI to do better in the respondent experience. And then on the customer side, we also allow our customers to point out sort of any issues. So I think having those evaluation frameworks and those human feedback loops as sort of a core part of the experience for respondents and customers is really key. One last thing I'll mention, and maybe this is something that's a little different from some of the other tools out there, is that we are starting to open up all of our system prompts to our customers, meaning that if they want to build their own moderator that behaves in a certain way that works better with their audience, they can do that. And they can actually see the exact prompt that's used. They can enter their own prompt. They can enter their own examples. They can use their own models. And so becoming more of an agent builder rather than just being one out-of-the-box agent is sort of a general direction that we are moving. And I think that a lot of organizations, as they get sort of sophisticated building agents into different parts of the workflow, this becomes sort of a baseline expectation. And so there is no one size fits all agent for anything. And anyone that just sort of has an out of the box solution and no controls over that is, we don't really sort of believe in that direction longer term.
Yeah, really, really interesting. And it is interesting. Yeah, so many points there. So first of all, thank you for that. And I think that is really different. And to me, it makes sense that I've got some groups that have, very sophisticated scientists that are thinking from one direction, or we've got folks where we were approaching, I don't know, folks that are lower income and we're looking at a very specific medical issue or something like that. So they're very different kind of population. So might make sense to have an approach that's slightly different in different cases. So really interesting.
Yeah,
it's one of the,
and sorry to
okay.
interrupt, but just to give you an example, just in the last week, we have an out of the box AI capability for probing, for example, and we had one customer sort of come in, and the first time it worked so well, they deployed it in production in their app, within a week, and they've been happy with the results. And then another customer came in and tried the probing capability. They were really not happy with it and said, we're really going to have to configure every part of this to make it work for us. And I think that's an example of where there really isn't one size fits all, high performing moderator. And what that means to different people can be very different.
Absolutely. Knowing fellow UX researchers, I completely agree. So, well, very cool. And we've talked a lot about Voicepanel, but we haven't shown it. So maybe now is a great time to ask you to just show us a little bit of the typical flow. And so I'll work on the technology here, and maybe you could just set up kind of what are we about to do, or what are we going to be seeing?
Yeah, I can share a new feature we've been working on. We actually just launched this yesterday to build a project with AI. And this is really getting at this cold start problem I mentioned that, it's very difficult a lot of the time to know where to start. And this is particularly true of product managers and designers. They may have all of the context about the product they're working on, the business objectives, but you don't have a clue like what's the right sort of starting point in terms of questions to ask or how to screen for the right people and so on. And so what this interface is I can just provide an objective of what I'm trying to accomplish. I can add assets, whether those are prototypes, images, videos, websites, mobile apps. I can do multiple as part of the same project if I want to compare, for example, two different designs and randomize them. And think of this as an agent that's going to sort of put together a proposal, and then you can go and edit it. And you can include screen recordings, video recordings, audio recordings. You can do quant surveys. You can do interviews. You can do user tests. You can do everything in between, all of the above. And so we used to have these templates, and we've moved more to this sort of general agent interface. So,
and John, just before we go any further, people always ask me when they ask about different tools. So you mean it can use Figma prototypes? And I see it right there. So I just wanted to confirm that yes, this is something that uses. If I'm right, I can have different Figma prototypes that I use as stimuli in this.
Yeah, that's correct. You can embed a Figma prototype directly in the experience, so you can have the questions side by side with the prototype. You can ask the respondent to do tasks, and you can also ask follow-up questions as they're going through the prototype. By the way, there's a lot of exciting work we're doing there. This is not available in our product yet, but it's something that's kind of core to the roadmap on a more multimodal interface where we can not only hear what the respondent is saying, but we can also observe what the respondent is sharing in a screen share and actually adapt, based on that as well. But I'm doing a lot of talking here, so let's show the product. So let's say I pulled up an example of I'm working on a new mobile app for skiers in Europe and would like some early feedback on some designs. And I'm going to pull an image in this case. I'm just going to upload um, a prototype of this app I just created. And now what the agent is going to do is actually draft a project here. This is a very simple example it started with, and so I can go ahead and edit this. Please add a few more open-ended questions to dig into the nav interface.
And John, a quick question. Because voice panel is so powerful, logically I could have more like a survey or interview. And so basically the AI is helping to recommend the best style of interaction with the participants.
Mhm.
Very cool.
Yeah, and I'd say we're really at the early stages of this particular interface, but the direction we want to go is actually have this trained on your existing research data. So it can know, like, there's already a study run a couple of months ago that may have answers here. Or, you know what? Maybe you shouldn't run this research because maybe you should do something a bit different because of kind of the best practices. And so, I think a good agent here is not just spitting out exactly what you want, but it's actually pushing back and giving you new ideas. But to your survey question, for example, I could say, please add a survey to a section at the beginning that asks closed choice questions about which ski resorts the user has been to. So maybe I want to do, some foundational research here. Make this a list of 10 ski resorts in Europe. And what I'm getting at here is it can actually be very painful to write surveys, particularly kind of closed choice options. It's extremely time consuming. And so, we want to make it sort of easier to input that. So once you have used this interface, I can go and sort of create the project here. I can now sort of edit any part of this interface that I like. Here, I can configure AI probing. So for example, if I want to probe on this question, I can enable it here. At the bottom here, we have a feature called conversations, which is a little different than probing after an open-ended question. This is actually a very free-form qualitative discussion. It's going to take everything the respondent has shared in this project up to this point and then have a open-ended dialogue on that for 2 minutes. And I could increase that time if I want. If I want, I can actually upload my own discussion guide. So you can mix, these closed choice questions, rating scales, open-ended questions. I can add tasks. So for example, if I wanted to get feedback on a prototype, I can just sort of put the URL in here. And then I can add steps like, I want to have a task instruction, like please use the prototype to get a certain thing done.
Yeah, really, really interesting. With the free form time, so you set it from like 2 to 4 minutes, for example. Are you finding, really just interested in knowing either what your recommendations are to your clients or how your clients are actually using this right now, typically?
Yeah. So we realized the sort of a use case for both of these open-ended questions as well as these free-form conversations. In general, the more foundational the research is, the more open you are to sort of discovering new things and taking the research in different directions. That's where we would recommend this sort of conversation. And what we found is that as the AI models have improved and as we've sort of improved our prompts, this actually performs a lot better than having a hard-coded set of 10 open-ended questions, for example. What can oftentimes, if you have these hard-coded open-ended questions, they don't apply to everyone all the time. It may be that someone has already answered one of those questions before and it starts to get a bit repetitive. If, on the other hand, you're doing more of sort of a quality quant study, so you want to make sure that every respondent is answering the same set of questions and you want to be able to compare those across different groups and things like that, that's when we recommend having these open-ended questions here. So it really sort of depends on the nature, of the research and kind of the at what stage of discovery the customer is in.
Cool. No, I'm really glad I asked then. Really interesting. So, Terrell, I'll let you keep going, but I appreciate that.
Yeah. So maybe what I can move to next, John, is to show you example results. After
Sure.
you run a project. So we have some projects that we ran here, and I can just pick a foundational use case here. In this example, we were asking consumers about their experience with streaming services, pretty basic setup with a few open-ended questions. Here's where you can do recruiting. You can create a link just like you would share a survey, for example, in Qualtrics, SurveyMonkey, or Typeform. This is our panel integration, and we integrate directly with very reputable providers, including respondent and user interviews. So you can recruit people in your target audience in just a few seconds. Here I can specify demographic targeting. I can add a screener. So for example, I can pull in these screener questions right here. And then in the monitor tab, this is where the responses come in. And so what you're getting back is very detailed responses. In this case, we were collecting audio of the participants. I can play back the audio right here. I can highlight anything I find interesting to put in a highlight reel. I'm getting back these demographics. And by the way, we've anonymized these. These are not real names. And lastly, we have our AI analysis. So a lot of our customers, they are using tools like Dovetail or Marvin, or maybe they have a data warehouse as their research repository, and they just export all of the transcripts there to keep everything in one place. And that's great. And we also have an out-of-the-box AI analysis. So we'll generate this report. We'll also do an analysis for each of those questions. So in the case of open-ended questions, we'll do a thematic analysis. So you get a quant breakdown as well as the qualitative evidence that you can dig into and see in context. And lastly, I'll mention our chat with the data. And so I think increasingly this is the type of interface that people are expecting, is that they can just put in their question and get back direct answers. So for example, what are the main reasons people cancel streaming subscriptions? I'm getting back this direct answer. Yeah, everything we do is sort of back with evidence. So, everything you're looking at here is really tying back to the transcripts, the audio, or the video if you're collecting that. So you can, everything is backed with that real evidence.
And if I'm right, just to sort of emphasize that point, I did machine learning a long time ago, but my impression is that, you can set AI essentially to be very creative or very uncreative. And I think in this case, you're linking all the use of Hulu, for example. Those are 20 things that came directly from transcripts, and so that you can look at those 20 to see, are they appropriate to be called use of Hulu as a sort of body. But each one gets you, I guess, directly to the quotes here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's correct.
Got it. Are you thinking over time it makes sense for you? So this is really good for one study. And if I'm doing a series of studies with you, are you thinking that Voicepanel will ultimately become my sort of place of record for all these things, and I could then search across different studies? Or I'm just trying to understand how it's focused right now.
Yeah, that's right. So the more research that's in here, the more the appetite to do sort of querying across a repository of many different projects. We don't have any of that in our product yet, but it's something we're starting to think about, is querying anything in your repository. Another sort of exciting direction for us is synthetic personas. So we've had many customers that have done segmentation projects with us, and we're spitting out, maybe sort of 5 or 6 personas that come out of a, n equals 1,000 study, and then make those personas accessible to the people who are building products for them. And it may be that your next project, you don't need to collect more data. You can actually just interact with these personas directly, and you can see the evidence of what the persona may do in a certain situation based on the fact that they did something very similar in this other project, and you could see exactly what happened. So we're pretty excited about the potential for synthetic personas to get people quicker answers as sort of like a first point of reference before collecting more data.
Yeah, I mean, so I teach a class on AI for customer research, and we do. It's sort of a hot button topic, the notion of synthetic users, and rightly so. It's very different and very foreign, at first blush. And so I think what you're saying is yes, this could be a source of inspiration, or also these things are the foundation is actually real life human data, and we can go back and look at that source data as well. So maybe this is a quick first pass or a way to, oh, I hadn't thought of things from that perspective, that kind of thing, rather than here's exact fact from the synthetic users. That's the way I think of it personally. And so, but I wondered, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with that. And I think if you were using synthetic users trained on just like a base LLM model, it has no context of
Right.
your actual customers. I think that will be very misleading, and I would put a lot of caution in using tools like that. Um, I like the concept of synthetic personas that are kind of based on real data. I'm much less bullish on a concept of a synthetic user being someone who is filling out a survey, for example, because if you're going to be sort of turtles all the way down, um, it's probably going to be better if you just have a turtle on top and you actually have like real data underneath.
Got it. Okay, very reasonable. Is there anything else you wanted to show us about voice panel? This is plenty, but I just making sure I know.
There's a lot that we could cover. Maybe last quick thing I'll show you is,
Sure.
you can see our in-product intercept. So we dog food our own product to get feedback. And so this is Voicepanel actually working in an app here. And I could just literally speak right here. Yeah, I find the results page a little bit confusing. And I can just sort of speak as I'm using the product. So all of this feedback comes to us in Slack. You can see this is a probing question. But what specifically did you find confusing about it? So I think that this in-product context, people are used to these very short-form surveys like NPS or customer effort score and things like that. But I think that we're very excited about how could you actually have a conversation with a user in context, like right at the perfect moment when they're using our product. And so yeah, that's the last thing I'll share here.
No, that's so nice that and I'm sure that, or I'm anticipating that I could then understand which page or dynamic page it is in my product. And anyway, many moons ago, I had to do the NPS and open text fields for a major government website, and trying to, Imagineer what page were they referring to with this comment, and how could we do better. So it is really interesting that you can have these dynamic questions right there, and then I know where you were when you made that comment. That's awesome.
Mhm.
That would have saved me a lot of hours back in the day. Okay, well, thank you so much. Well, here, let me take a big step back then. Thank you so much for showing me voice panel, and everyone who's watching. So very cool. Um, and so I guess one of the things I wanted to ask, so I've first really focused on who is this for, and sort of target benefits and stuff, and I think we've really seen those now. Um, but you are braver than me. You've launched a product and got it to fruition, and that takes so much like drive and persistence and so on. So let me just ask. So first of all, hats off to you, and but kind of what inspired this, and what's the drive that made you feel compelled to do this?
Yeah, thanks for asking. So I really want to solve a problem that have always had myself as a product manager. I've always felt that the most important thing that I can do in my job to build great products is to understand who my users are and what they care about. And I think just the overhead of really doing that well is difficult. And I think all product teams experience this in different ways. But there's a few specific triggers that really got me and my co-founder, excited about this opportunity. When I was back at Google, I was working on the Google Maps team, and we were building products for small business owners. So this is the Google Business Profile, and the sort of the Maps sort of search experience for consumers. And we had a team called the Trusted Tester team that was very good at sort of conducting qualitative research with customers or other audiences. And we would sort of put in a request like, we want to talk to 50 plumbers, in 3 different markets in Europe, for example. And they would come back with a beautiful deck. They would have videos, and we would be asking very specific questions about, how do you use this particular feature, and hear them talk about it. And it was just unbelievably influential in clarifying like what the real problems are, and how these people think, how they make decisions, and it could just completely reframe how we thought about building the product. And so this is something you don't get from analytics, something you don't get from dashboards. Like you really have to go talk to people. So that was one experience of like, so I've always really enjoyed qualitative research and just seeing the impact of it. But another experience I had around the same time is I was working on a feature called Google Duplex. So this is an AI agent that conducts phone calls. And most famously, this is used for booking reservations at hair salons or at restaurants. So you can have an agent sort of call a business for you. But lesser known is we also use this technology to gather information from business owners, things like holiday hours, services offered, if there are any business closures. And we could do this with tens of millions of businesses at once. And so I thought about like, why can't we use this sort of technology for qualitative research? Because it clearly is scaling, it can clearly sort of adapt, and it can clearly reach this audience. And so that sort of triggered a lot of thinking of, could organizations actually use this technology to make collecting qualitative data easier?
Cool. No, I appreciate the stories in the background. And it makes a lot of sense. Even with your first story, I was actually anticipating, and I've got to admit, I was nodding, and I think I might have been nodding to the wrong thing, but I so appreciate that you were, really valued the qualitative research. And me too. That's why I wrote a book called Design for How People Think. But I wanted to say that I was also imagining that, as the person asking the research team to do that, that maybe you didn't get the research quite as fast as you were hoping, or, you're like, I feel like sometimes as the person presenting there, sometimes I get a question and I felt like our honest answer was, oh, yeah, no, we never asked about that. And so having the ability to have the product team more deeply involved in designing the research, and also having this ability to be so dynamic with something like Voicepanel really changes that. And I guess I also wonder I don't know if you have like any sort of statistics on this kind of thing, but I'm always curious to know if once a group has something like Voicepanel, like normally the research team could do body of work 1, but there's always question 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 that never got answered satisfactorily because we did the highest priority things with the research team. So I guess I just wonder if this is an opportunity for people to get more of that breadth of research for maybe this tertiary kind of priority things, but still really valuable input.
Yeah, I mean, pretty much every product team that I've been a part of, there was more demand for research
Right.
than, supply. And, a lot of those, particularly those tactical kind of evaluative requests where, I just want feedback on a Figma prototype or something like that. There may not be the bandwidth for a researcher to do that. And it's probably not the best use of that researcher's time, right? They have a certain expertise that they could be doing more strategic foundational work. And researchers shouldn't be acting like secretaries for the product team. And so my experience is that there was always more research that we want to do. And it's something we could just never do enough of, is my personal perspective. And I think looking forward, I would expect that for everything that's changing in research, I would expect and hope that organizations are going to do an order of magnitude more research than they do now. I think the volume of research is only going to increase. And a couple of reasons I think that. One is that people are building products a lot faster now. With AI tooling, you can produce a working production app in maybe a day instead of months. And if you want that product to succeed, it's incredibly important that you understand who's using it, what they actually think of it. And so I think research is really becoming a bottleneck to building a differentiated product. And if you're not able to sort of collect that feedback efficiently, it's not going to keep up with how sort of product teams are going to be moving a lot faster. And I think another thing that's changing is that the nature of what products look like is fundamentally changing. I think there was maybe only 5 companies in the world, Google, Meta, Amazon, Netflix, that were building products with machine learning sort of under the hood. You think of a product like Google Photos, an amazing product, by the way. There's a lot of things behind the scenes to kind of make that product do these delightful things like, recognize different people in photos and organize them automatically for me. But now anybody can create products like that. And I think it fundamentally changes sort of the type of feedback you need to be collecting. If every one of your users has a different experience.
Yeah, so interesting. So thank you for your perspective too. So ultimately, I guess I wanted to ask, just in terms of you do have to have a little bit of Wayne Gretzky in you of skating to where the puck will be, not where it is now. So how do you see both sort of voice panel evolving over time, to the extent you can share publicly your plans or thinking, and secondarily, for folks like us or product teams, UX people, how do you see our work sort of evolving over time because of the capabilities that things like Voicepanel will have?
Yeah, I think one direction we're excited about, and I mentioned earlier, is the synthetic personas. And so we're starting to think about if you have a large body of research already that's very relevant to a team that's building a product, how do we enable that team to just quickly ask a question and get answers with sort of the relevant evidence without necessarily collecting more data? And if you have an internal panel, for example, it's a constrained resource, right? It may not be literally enough people to sort of gather feedback. And so working around that constraint is really important. And I think synthetic personas will be a great entry point. Another thing that's, I think, going to really shift is there's a lot of companies now that have a dedicated research ops function whose job is to sort of think about tooling across the organization and enable the product team to do better research. And so we're going to be adding a lot more tooling for that sort of ops persona to configure the prompts, to monitor what's going on, to understand the quality, publish guardrails on things like who's able to publish, question banks and things like that. So I think that's a big persona that we're thinking about, and we're going to see a lot more from Voicepanel in the coming months. And then, yeah, to your question of how does the research role change? I would love to see researchers talking to customers all of the time, and just doing that more and spending less time on manual tasks like writing screener questions, fielding requests from the product team, putting them into a queue. And, there's a lot of sort of manual work that's happening. And so I would love to see a lot of the sort of repetitive manual work goes away so people can really focus on just talking to customers more. And I think, I have not been a researcher myself, but I think if I were a researcher today, I would be thinking about how can I also scale myself? How can I have 10x more impact? The skills that I've learned, how can I bring that to the rest of the organization, which might involve, for example, training AI agents to automate, a lot of the work that in the past I did manually. So that's my personal perspective.
That's a lot, and so very thoughtful. I appreciate it. And in terms of uh, talking about the research ops side, one of the things that I've heard some folks say is will increasingly less be maybe the doer of every research interview, and be a little bit more of a conductor of a set of AI tools that amplifies our abilities. And it is a big mind shift, but then you're like, wow, think of the power or the impact I can have. So really interesting. I've got a last question for you. I just wanted to ask, is there anything about Voicepanel in terms of like, you have something that's really impressive and didn't exist before. Is there any sort of achievement or milestone that you're particularly proud of with Voicepanel?
Yeah, I say something I'm very proud of is just seeing companies adopt it and integrate it into their process on their own. So, in other words, this sort of product-led growth motion. And I'll give an example. A couple of weeks ago, a health and wellness app uh, came to us. They started a free trial. They had a good experience with it, and they decided to actually integrate it into their mobile app so that at a certain point, when users complete onboarding, they can actually have this sort of AI dialogue. And they were getting the responses sent to Slack. They were getting insights on these users they'd never seen before, insights that their existing surveys were not uncovering. And they did all of this without any intervention from us. And we ended up talking to them and understanding their journey. But I think for me, just seeing those smaller customers come in and just start getting value right away made me feel, okay, we finally have something that is like really easy to use, and I think we have a long way to go. But those are the moments that make me feel proud.
Excellent. Well, yeah, I wish that. Anyway, I think you are exceptional in that it is so great to have it, just go straight to Slack as a representative example, and clearly you're tying into panels as well, so making it much more seamless. And I think that's a really important piece to the puzzle for unlocking it for folks who aren't UX researchers, and for that matter, for us just amplifying what we're doing. So, well, very cool. If people did want to give it a try, how do they get started?
Yeah, if you go to voicepanel.com, you can create a free account. You can see everything that I was sharing in the demo. You can create projects. You can look at example projects that were run and kind of see the analysis. So that's the best way to get started. And I would also love to chat. If what we talked about today is resonating with you, please reach out to me on LinkedIn and we can set up a time to chat.
Nice. Okay. Well, again, thank you so much for taking the time, and I learned a lot through this, and I think our viewers did too. So I really, really appreciate your time and openness to this, and also just the ways that you're contributing to all the things we're doing, and the ways we're evolving in research. So thank you. Well, here I'll just go ahead and close this out. So again, John, thank you so much for sharing Voicepanel with us, and that's all today. And so thank you so much for tuning in and keeping up with the latest AI for research and product folks. So of course, subscribe and tell us what you found about Voicepanel that was really interesting, and wishing you brilliant insights with AI.